I'm Professor Zhu Xiangyu from Shandong University. I'm very happy to discuss knowledge with all of you today. What I teach is Chapter 3, Spinal Shock. Animals that cut the spinal cord below the level of the fifth cervical spine to separate the spinal cord from the upper center are called spinal animals. The concept of spinal shock. The spinal cord that is connected from the high center temporarily lost the ability to reflex and enter an up reprostative state. Spinal shock manifestations. Skeletal muscle tension decreased or even disappears. Blood pressure decreased. Blood vessels dilate. Sweating reflex disappeared. Urine and feces retention. The cause of spinal shock is severe. The spinal cord suddenly lost the regulation of the high center. Crossed extensor reflex. The reflex can occur when you step on the sharp object. There is rapid lifting of affected foot, supporting the weighted shift to it. Scratch reflex. The definition of scratch reflex. The reflex activities of innervated skeletal muscles that can cause the same muscle to contract it when it is pulled by an external force. When the innervated muscles is pulled by external forces, the resulting reflex contraction. Tendon reflex. The reflex caused by the rapid pulling the tendon. Muscle attention. The stretch reflex caused by the slow and continuous scratch of the tendon. Whatever the stimulus, when the spindle are activated, their associated sensory neurons transmit impulses at a high frequency to the spinal cord. Types of distraction reflex. Tendon reflex refers to the scratch reflex that occurs when the tendon is pulled quickly, which is a single synaptic reflex, such as knee reflex. This is common in the daily life. Muscle tension refers to the scratch reflex that occurred when the tendon is pulled slowly and continually, which is polysynaptic reflex. Postsynaptic inhibition of the effect is of inhibitory synapses on the postsynaptic membranes. Muscle tongue reflex contractibility is not large. It is manifested at alternate contraction of different motor units of the same muscle. It is not easy to produce the footage. Physiological significance. Maintain its standing posture. Regulation of muscle tension by lower brainstem and upper center. Stiffness of the brain. Cut off the brainstem between the upper and the lower part of the midbrain, and animals will have the phenomenon of muscle tension and hypertension, such as strained lips, raised head and tail, and stiff spine. Brainstem network. Stimulating this area can strengthen muscle tension and cortical motor response. Transection of the brainstem at midbrain level, above vestibular nuclei and below red nucleus. Symptoms including the extensor rigidity or posture in both upper and lower lips. Go to brain stiffness. Stimulating this zone can inhibit muscle tension and cortical motor response. The descending inhibition function of the inhibitory area of the reticular structure is cut off. The activities of the inhibitory area is weakened, and the activity of the facilitating area is relatively increased. Loss of input from inhibitory medullary RF. Activity of this center is dependent on input from the high centers. The extensor rigidity is gamma loop dependent section at the dorsal root interrupts the gamma loop, and the rigidity is relieved. Spine cerebellum provides the circuit for corresponding mainly the movements of the distal portion of the lips, especially the hands and the fingers. Compared the intention from the motor cortex and the right nucleus with the performance from the periphery parts of the lips. The fiction of spine cerebellum send corrective output signals to the lateral motor neurons in the anterior horns of S, C, G, M that control the distal parts of the limbs, such as hands and fingers. Cerebellum received all its part from the motor cortex, adjacent premotor, and the somatic sensory quantities of the brain, transmits his output information in the upward direction back to the brain. Functions is the feedback manners with all of the cortical sensory motor system to plan sequential voluntary body and limbs movements. Planning this such as tense at second in advance of actual movements. Main functions of the cerebral hemisphere: adjusting body balance, regulating muscle tension. The cerebellum can regulate muscle tension activity, and his regulatory effect is manifested in two aspects: restraining muscle tension and facilitating muscle tension. The facilitating effect of the cerebellum on muscle tension is realized by the two sides of anterior lobe. Coordinatory voluntary movements. Now, let's talking about the points of learning and memory. Learning. This process by which the body acquired new behavior in order to adapt to changes in the environment. From the childhood, we always stayed in the approach of learning. The form of learning, non-associated learning, there is no need to form a clear connection between the stimuli and response, such as habituation and sensitization. The joint learning. Two events recurred very closely in time and finally form a connection in the brain. Now, classical conditioned reflex. It is established by the computation of regulated stimuli and unconditioned stimuli over time. This process is called reinforcement. Operant conditional reflex. Animals must complete a certain movement or operation before they can stress it. Classical conditioned reflex. This is established by the combination of unrelated stimuli and unconditioned stimuli over time. This process is called reinforcement. Operation conditioned reflex. Animals must complete a certain movements or operation before they can be strengthened. The established of classical conditioned. Irrelevant stimuli precede and conditioned stimuli and are combined multiple times. 2. It is closely related to the state of animal body. There are some physiological experts we should notice, not simply time of event relative to each other. Blocking phenomenon. Time does not add anything, so not learned. We can detect a positive relative between two stimuli. Extinction can occur over time. Area 41 and 42 of the upper temporal gingers and the transverse temporal gingers are the auditory cortex area, and the posterior part of the upper temporal gyrus is the ordinary speech center in the dominant hemisphere. The anterior part of the temporal lobe is the mental cortex. Human emotion and mental activities are not only related to the prefrontal cortex, but also closely related to the temporal lobe. The hippocampus is related to the memory. Hippocampus is a very important region to deal with memory and long-time learning. So we should notice about this part, which removal of this organ results in an inability to transfer memories from short-term to long-term storage. Specifically, what was affected? The language center and wide-side advantages of cerebral cortex. The function of cerebral cortex on both sides. The compounds cosm transmit information in both directions. Other cognitive functions of the cerebral cortex in addition to language activities. The cerebral cortex has many other cognitive functions, such as the prefrontal cortex may be involved in short-term stimulate memories and emotional activities. The temporal cortex may be involved in auditory and visual memories. The parietal cortex may participate in the learning of fine sensory and space deep perception. Language is human-specific. Critical period is the first language. Acquisition of L1 is impaired after puberty. Acquisition of L2 is impaired after puberty. Evaluation of language. Gesture was important. Now we compared with left brain and right brain. Pre- and post-operation studies show that selective stimulation of right and left hemisphere was a possibility by stimulating different parts of the body. Left hemisphere could read and verbally communicating. Right hemisphere had small disquistic capacity. Vocabulary and grammar capacity of right is far less than left. Now, we're talking about 3 chapters of this lesson. Finally, only the process take place in the left hemisphere could be described verbally. Precision of stimulus analysis in the brain is reduced on the medulla area of the body. Now, this language about the brain and the spinal cord provides unchallenged control about our body. But hemispheric dominance is not absolute. Both sides are necessary. Left is better than right, but both are affected. At the end of this lesson, I'm very happy to teach the chapter of this lesson. Thank you all for your attention.